Hello, my name is Graham Clark and I work for Intracon GmbH. Today I'm delivering the episode which covers setting up the scan to email option on the HP A3 printers. We start by opening the embedded web server of our chosen printer. Just type the IP address of your printer into your web browser. Here I'm using Google Chrome. Accept the security warning message and remember, we always recommend having a password set for the embedded web server on your printer. If you don't yet have a password set, for instance when you have unboxed your printer for the first time, you still need to sign in to gain access to all the available features. Click the sign in button on the top right corner of the screen. When the sign in page is displayed, leave the password blank and click the sign in button. You now see more options on the left hand side, including the remote control panel menu, which we will use later. Now we click on the Scan/Digital Sending tab and then click the email setup on the left hand side. The first thing to do is to tick the Enable Scan to Email box. Now you want to set up your email server's SMTP address. This is the IP address of your server. Click the Add button. There is an option to search for your email server on the network. I don't recommend using this option because the search option goes out and tries to find the email server, but you don't know what it finds or where it finds it, and it can take some time and you're sitting there waiting. So basically I never use it to search for the server. So in this box you put in the IP address of the mail server and click Next. The next thing is that you need to specify a port number on which the SMTP service is listening. The standard port is port 25 and it's already filled in here. There are obviously servers that use a different port number. For example, if you're going to use Google Mail or Office 365 Mail, they will be different port numbers. They use different ports, and again that is something the customer needs to provide you with. I usually ask the customer for any and all necessary information up front with a control document. That way if the setup doesn't work, I can go back to them and say the information they supplied is incorrect. And that is why the installation has failed. If you plan up front, then you should fly through the install. So then usually email servers have a limit to an attachment size they can handle. Now the attachment size is set to 0 here, which means it's unlimited. But again, you should talk to the email administrator of the mail server to find out what kind of attachment size the limit is. Because if the document you want to scan becomes larger than the set attachment size, the MFP will split the scan into 2 or 3 or 4 chunks and send it as separate emails with attachments in each. Another option that's important to understand is enabling the SSL protocol, especially when using a public email server like Gmail or Office 365. Because the email protocol SMTP is normally not encrypted. So you're sending your email within the network basically in clear text. So if anyone sniffs the network, they get the email and can read its contents in clear text, which is fine if it's in the company because the company is behind the firewall. You know what goes on in the company network and you trust your employees. But as soon as you go out of the firewall to Gmail or Office 365, you want your emails to be encrypted, and this is done using SSL protocol. One thing that's important, if we use SSL, we're going to use in the background certificates for the encryptions. And when you have a certificate used for encryption, the system wants to verify the certificate. Is it valid? It is a proper trusted certificate. Or is it a certificate that somebody just created and tries to fool you? So if you have this box checked, validate the certificate, it means the MFP will go out and will look for what's called a CA root certificate, where it can find the authority out there that can verify the certificate used for the encryption is actually valid. If your customer says, look, I don't have this CA root certificate because they may not be able to get it or they don't know how to, the MFP offers an option to uncheck this box, which means it's accepting the encryption certificate that it's presented with. It will not verify it. So it could be that the certificate is a fraud. It will work, but you may end up that somebody is listening in with the man-in-the-middle attack, as it's called. For us in this example, I have an open SMTP server. I don't do encryption because it's on my network. I have my port 25. I don't know what my size limit is, so I leave it to 0. But again, this is something the customer would need to tell us. And then I basically go next. The next security setting is if the server wants you to authenticate against the request to send an email. By default or in the past, it was usually not required, so the server accepted any incoming requests. But today, and specifically with cloud services, authentication is required. Google Mail wants to know who's contacting and who's sending an email. So Google and all online services always require SMTP authentication. So we have two options here. We can basically have the user sign in before they send an email. So they have to type in, for example, their full Gmail address and password on the control panel of the MFP, which is very cumbersome on a touchscreen if you don't have, for instance, a Flow device with a keyboard. And it can also be time consuming. Normally what people do is they say, I've created a special email account on my Gmail or Office 365 system, and it has a defined username and defined password, which I always use to sign in. For example, in an office where they use Office 365, they have an email user which is called MFP Scanner, and that is the user we always use. So the MFP logs on for you in the background with that user and establishes the connection. This means later on, when we configure the from field for our email, it has to be the same email address of the user that we use here. Because Gmail or Office 365 will not accept that you can log on with one user and then from the from field you have a different user. So for my setup here, I don't require authentication. My SMTP server is just open. It accepts requests from anybody. Now you just click on Next. Now we have these options. Because the MFP is using the email server, we just configured for sending emails. That's why it's grayed out. But we can also choose to send faxes through email using a LANFax solution. We can have device alerts sent by email from the device, such as low on toner or ink or paper, if you want the device to tell you proactively. And we can select auto send to send information via email to HP or other recipients. This could be the usage page or the supplier's status page or any reporting you want to send automatically and periodically. So the customer needs to decide what he wants to use the email server for. For best practices, obviously you uncheck the ones you don't want sent to email to use. Now you click on Next. The next thing, we see a summary of the options we have set up and have an option to test the whole setup basically by sending an email to a known email address. Okay, it says it was successful. That's good. So let's quickly check if we received the email. I have my web-based email system here, and if I go to my inbox, here is my test email saying congratulations, you have successfully set up this HP imaging printing device to send email. Now click the Finish button, and at the home screen make sure to check the Enable Send to Email button at the top of the page. You see that you can add more SMTP servers. So if the first one is not available, it will jump to the second one. If the second one is not available, it will jump to the third one. To be honest, I've never had that with any customer. So next, we'll need to configure the default email settings. We need to provide a default from email address. So in my setup, I would call that mfp@intraconlab.com. And I usually also use that as the display name. The MFP needs to have a sender email address where the email is coming from. Some email systems require this email address to be set up in the email server as a valid user. Some other email systems don't care. Again, you need to check this with your customer to ensure a smooth setup. The option which is at the moment checked, User Editable, means that at the control panel, when the user is sending an email, they could go and change that, for example, to their own email address. Of course, this is not a good policy to have, as it leaves the email system open to abuse. You could also select this option, User's Address Sign In Required. This means that you must sign in at the MFP's control panel to allow you to send the email. Again, this must match the setup you did before. In the subject field, you can have a predefined subject and add information such as date, time and username. For example, you could use scan underscore with the date and time of you sending it. And you can also keep that editable for the user, or you can say no, that's not editable. Next, you can add an email message. Remember, we are sending an email and the scan will always be an attachment. So you could have an email message and say, this is a scanned email from the Office MFP, and again, you can make that user editable so they can modify it, or you can stop that and make it uneditable. So basically, the last thing you need to do is your file settings. Obviously you want a file name, that makes sense, something such as a scan, but you can leave it blank and make it editable by the user as the customer wants. Next, you choose the file format. You can either choose a file format as default, say PDF, by selecting it, and leave the format editable by the user, or choose your preferred format and remove the ability to change it by making the field uneditable. That way you're always scanning a PDF document. Lastly, you have the scanning options, such as how the MFP detects if the document is colour or black and white, etc. etc. I would leave these as automatic, but it's your customer's choice as to the default, and this field is always editable. For the quality, file size and resolution settings, it's best to work with your customer to get the scanned images they want and need from the device. So do some sample scans at different resolutions to see what works best for them. But remind them, as resolution gets bigger, the file size increases. If you double the resolution, you quadruple the file size. Don't forget, apply your settings now. Next, make sure that the Enable Send to Email checkbox is in fact still checked. The next thing we're going to do is look at the front panel of the MFP to see how it works. For this we'll use the remote control panel. We click on first the scan icon, then onto the scan to email icon. As you can see, the from field is already completed and we can't edit it, just as we set it up. We can add an address here, so we can just type in who we're sending the email to. As you can see, the subject field already has the scan underscore and the device date and time. The file name is already there as a scanned document, and the message is also there, just to let someone know it's scanned from an MFP. Because we allowed edits on the file type and resolution, we can change the PDF, even though it's the one we set up as the default, to any other file format. And also the resolution can be changed because we allow that. Once we're finished, we can click Done or just go straight to Send, and the document will sent out. In the next episode, we're going to be looking at more advanced options in email setup, as well as quick sets. Join us again soon.